Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we explore entertaining and enlightening discussions of the adventure of life and all things good. From science and technology to history and philosophy to leadership and success. We hope to give you a better understanding of the world and skills for everyone to pursue their own adventure. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we talk about all things good in the pursuit of the adventure of life. I'm Zach, and we got a great show today. We're going to discuss art, the beauty of art, and all things that make art great in life. However, I can't do this alone, so as always, I'm joined by Rafe. Rafe, how are we doing today?
Hey Zach, I am fantastic. It's a pleasure being back on the air with you. We do these record for those of you out there in Radio Land. We obviously are not doing these live, and sometimes we will record like one a week, and then we'll have a situation where we'll cram a whole bunch of them into a week, and then take a little vacation or something like that. And we've had about 10 days off or something like that, Zach. It's been a while since we've done this, so it's good to do it again, and it's good to be back at you in front of the bufnagle microphone of doom, or whatever it is called. And it's good to be back, and I'm looking forward to learning some stuff about art today.
All right, that sounds fantastic. So, because we have no knowledge of art, and because the big brain smart head of the week, Olivia DeCleene, has forgotten more about art than we know about art, we have brought her on to help us learn about that. So, Olivia, give us a little introduction about yourself, about your history and knowledge of art, and how you're going to help educate us and the rest of our listeners.
Sure. So I have a bachelor's degree in studio art, which means that when I was in college, I studied some very unemployable skills, such as painting and drawing and making prints and stretching canvases. And I also studied a little bit of digital art, which includes video making and editing and kind of some newer forms of art in new media. So I did not have a concentration, but I studied very many different kinds of art making and blended a lot of those together throughout my years there. And now I work as a floral designer. So I employ a lot of my artistic knowledge to make compositions with flowers.
So I want to, it seems to me like, and I didn't realize this until you went to college, that I always viewed art like arts and crafts. Like like you learn the technical stuff. Here's how to make glue, or here's how to stretch a canvas, or here's how to draw a 3D perspective or something like that. But in the discussions with you while you were in college studying art, I learned a lot of, I want to say I learned about art, right? So I learned that it's not just technique. There are people who are very good paint technicians. They're very good pencil technicians. They're great video editing technicians. But art is more than just technique. It's not just being able to, it's not just being a human camera. All right. There's more to it than that. There's a whole theory and a whole history of knowing how to take the human experience and put it into a picture or a sculpture or something. And that's another thing you learn in art.
Right. Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. And I do think that is a distinction between art and between craft. And I think craft does have a lot to do with technique, about how to technically do something. But I also, in my own studies of art, I began to learn through studying art history and looking at artists that I loved and understanding what compelled them to make the things that they wanted to make and all this stuff. I learned that artists are really philosophers, and what they're doing is sort of making visual ideas. So they're taking these ideas maybe about the world around them and communicating them in a visual way. And that is a whole separate component to being what we would consider a successful artist, is not only being able to paint something, but also being able to communicate an idea as well.
So to be successful, you can't just be a technician. And
Right.
and I would guess that a lot of people go into art. A lot of the people that go into art programs are very accomplished technicians.
Right. I am not.
You're
correct.
all right. So but now you're like I've watched you and Zach draw things, and Zach, are you an accomplished technician?
These scribbles, do they count?
No, the scribbles. Zach has little scribbles that he holds up to give us clues about how much time is left in our recording.
I have scribbles of rugby diagrams and plays and that stuff. Does that count as art?
Well, and that's the thing is what counts as art, and just because you can do it technically may or may not make it art, and just because you can't do it very well technically doesn't mean it's not. So there's got to be something that is art. There's got to be a definition of that, and a lot of people worry and fight about this sort of thing. So how do you? When people say what is it that makes that art, and what is it that makes something else just ink on paper?
Yeah. Well, before you dive into that, what's the difference between a famous painting like School of Athens and something that you would do in college, let's say like a final project, big culmination piece about maybe your experience in college, and it's a similar painting. It's you and your friends in different scenarios. Maybe it's you and your buddies like out having dinner, and it's kind of like the three of you around a table with a pizza. Or it's maybe you guys like in a classroom studying, and it's this depiction of like, let's say you at Seattle University as opposed to School of Athens, which is a depiction of philosophers and mathematicians and well-educated people conversing and engaging with each other. What's the difference between those two things, and why is School of Athens like proclaimed as one of the Hellenistic great pieces of art, and your painting might just be forgotten in a long list of art majors?
Well, go ahead. Go.
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with a cultural and historical context of art, which actually is really critical to understanding why certain works of art become famous, or why certain artists really become huge names within certain art movements. A lot of it has to do with the opportunities that are available at certain points of history, and I think that art has a huge role in culture, and I think people also they also respond to culture by making art. So there's a lot that you can learn within a historical context. For instance, I think that if Jackson Pollock were around at the same time as who
did the School of Athens?
Is it Michelangelo?
I don't think so.
Oh, we're gonna look it up.
Don't put this on the podcast.
What? All right, hold on.
It was Raphael.
It was Raphael. Okay. So, I mean, I think had
it was one of the Ninja Turtles.
We are definitely putting this on the podcast.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's right.
Had Jackson Pollock been around at the same time as Raphael,
the Ninja Turtles,
they probably would have been like, Jackson, like, you really suck. This is not what we're looking for here. But if you look at the context in which Jackson Pollock was making these paintings, sure, a lot of people could say, well, that just seems like paint splattered onto a canvas. But for him, it was, this entrance into a whole other psyche. And people were not really concerned with that necessarily at the time that Raphael was living. I think what was really important to them was a lot of classic Western beauty and a lot of classic Western thought. And those things are very visible within that painting. I mean, we got Socrates in there.
We talked about this painting before, haven't we, Zach? We have
talked about this not on air, but individually we have talked about this.
When we talked about Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, didn't we mention this? That is it Plato and Aristotle who are the center of that piece, or is it Socrates and Aristotle? I think, well, it's Aristotle's one of them, right? And the other one's either Plato or Socrates. We'll have to look it up. All right, we're not art historians. Maybe we can get a break. Did you guys study this? Did you study that painting?
Yes, I remember studying that painting. I don't remember a whole lot about it, except for the fact that
Plato walking alongside a young Aristotle. So
and
we have mentioned this before when we talked about Alexander the Great, way back when we were explaining that Cleopatra was actually Greek, and that there's the line of philosophers going from Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle, and they're all kind of connected, and but their philosophies are a little different. Plato was more in the metaphysical, spacey air, and that's depicted in the painting as he's pointing to the sky, and Aristotle was more earthly and human in being, and he's pointed towards the ground and what's in front of him.
Yeah, so the painting represents what the West sees as its contribution to philosophy and knowledge, but you may not have that as a desire for a painting you make.
Sure.
Which may make it may be technically as good, but it may not be fitting in the time when it was made.
Right. Yeah. And I think also, I mean, a lot of people when they talk about what we refer to as modern art or contemporary art, typically that timestamp is art before and after 1945, which is the end of World War II. And World War II, as we know, like has had a huge effect on culture and just the way that even America is now. So that's a little bit of a distinction that we make, not to say that everything from, BC 400 all the way to 1945 is the same.
Right.
But that's a general categorization of some art history.
So I know when you were looking to get into college and to do things, there were a lot of things that were on your plate of things you were interested in broadly, maybe not specifically. And I remember there was discussion of architectural ideas, and I know we've had discussions about what makes good architecture and what doesn't, and so do you have you looked any further into that?
Yeah, but before we dive into that a little bit, we mentioned like 400 BC to 1945 as like it wasn't one whole movement. I mean, the first thing I thought of was Monet, and he was like big into the Impressionist movement, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. So how did and that stuff was very real and very I look at it today, I'm like that's really cool, and that's art. I get that it's art, but what made that movement exist as opposed to the Jackson Pollock scatter paint across a canvas and let's call it a day? Why was there historical reasoning for why that type of art existed and why Jackson Pollock's art in the 70s existed?
And then come back around to architecture. You have 10 seconds. Go.
Okay, so so as far as the Impressionist and the Post-Impressionist and I believe it's pronounced Fauvism, I can't totally remember, and all of that kind of movement, which sort of fed into this contemporary art since 1945, and actually fed into Jackson Pollock and all of this stuff. Eventually, I cannot remember exactly because I have forgotten things, but I think a lot of that had to do with a general changing of the world. So if we think about the Industrial Revolution, and people start to see things very differently, but also I think it was just a new exploration of light. So Monet painted very, very quickly, and he tried to capture a single moment, and he would often, as we see in something like his haystack paintings, he would attempt to paint the same subject, but at different times of day. And really it was kind of just how should I say,
an experiment?
Well, it was an experiment, but really it was just an investigation of especially light. And that is why, we call it an impression of a thing. His paintings don't really look like, boats on the water, but we sort of get the impression that there is water and there are boats in the water and there's a certain kind of light. So he captures that one moment.
So, but you said there was this whole thing around light, but there's technological advances that take place that end up in the art world. And weren't there things like the ability to actually make, different pigments and different media for producing those, for producing the artwork, allowed different artists different options when it came to these things. So there had to have been something going on when Monet came in that wasn't available to guys 500 years in the past. Is that accurate?
I think it's accurate. I honestly can't remember. So but I think that, you know, I also know that the Industrial Revolution, and especially the fact that people began to travel by train, caused the world to move a lot faster. So that was something else that was available to people. Is I mean, we don't think about train travel being very fast nowadays, but if you compare walking somewhere to going on a train, there was definitely an increase in speed in the way that people began to live.
Yeah, and we've touched on this, Zach, before when we talked about just about time zones. We've made that statement that prior to the invention of the train, nothing moved faster than a horse, pretty much. Right. And people certainly didn't, and that mattered more than just time zones and watches. It mattered to how people saw the world.
Yeah, and then I mean, if you compare that to Jackson Pollock, I mean, what was going on when he created things? There was a lot of political distress. There was a lot of just general energy going on in the world at that time, with a lot of social revolutions that were taking place. And I think a lot of people had a response to that was very emotional, and that is completely what someone like Jackson Pollock does, is an attempt to enter into a psyche as opposed to an observation of the world. And I think that movement, we tend to see what we would probably consider more vulgar art nowadays, I think, because of that, and a lot of political activism in art as well.
So going back to the architecture thing,
to that.
I think, I mean, if you look at the classic, you know, the train stations built in the 1800s and the early 1900s, and bank buildings and government buildings, how they were grand, and you know, they after Greek and Roman kinds of things. But now there's a move these days toward lots of glass and lots of
natural light
and steel, and maybe even celebrating the architect. So as to look what I can make. Look at, I've seen these huge glass spirals and some incredible new architecture.
Yeah, I mean, that new architecture looks really cool, and it's really grand, and you know, it's fun to look at from a visual standpoint. But if you're the engineer designing that, that's got to be a disaster. All that random steel in places, the glass somewhere half on its side, like that's also a feat that we need to talk about. But
yeah, that's got to be a difficult thing, because the architect is the artist, but the engineer's got to make it work. And those guys got to be able to work together somehow. And that's those guys, the structural engineer guys, are really the unsung heroes in that sort of thing. So Olivia, you went to school doing visual art stuff, and then you now do flowers. All right. And you work at a flower shop, but you get to practice. I mean, so like, there's technical stuff that you've learned doing flower stuff, but there's also the ability to apply art themes and techniques and learnings in the flower business.
Yeah. I think a lot of the knowledge that I do apply to floral design has to do with color theory, which is something that I studied a lot of in college, and that's something that I think about a lot when I'm arranging flowers.
Yeah. Okay. So you said color theory. So what is color theory, and how would that influence one, artistry and paintings and things like that, and how would it influence your creation of floral or arrangements?
Okay. Yeah. I'm not sure if there's really a definition of color theory, but color theory has to do with how we think about colors being in harmony or perhaps in contrast with each other. Maybe colors are not in harmony, and that creates a certain feeling in the painting.
Dissonance?
Yes, dissonance. Yeah. So color theory typically uses the 12-step color wheel, which includes 12 colors. And it starts with the primaries, which are red, yellow, and blue. And then we move on to the secondaries, which is two of the primaries mixed together.
Okay, wait. So I make sure I got this right.
Green, orange, and purple.
Right. So if I do Play-Doh, all right, and I do orange, I do blue Play-Doh and red Play-Doh and yellow Play-Doh. I can mix the blue and the red together, and I get
orange.
Blue. Wait.
Oh, blue and red.
Blue and red.
Purple.
Purple. Okay. Blue and red, purple, and I take.
I did not know.
Exactly that one. Okay, and I take red and yellow, and I get orange.
Orange.
Okay, and I take this one almost because I could always see when I was a kid that red and yellow would make orange. He was like, yeah, I can see this kind of in the middle, and like even the red and the blue would make purple. But when you took it, blew my mind as a little kid that blue and yellow make
green.
I was like that. Okay, so those are the primaries, red, yellow, and blue, and then the secondaries. But then there's a zillion tertiaries. Yep.
So
you take every pair and you get them mixed.
Yeah, a tertiary will typically be it's a color in between colors. So we have red, orange, and yellow. So in between red and orange is red, orange.
Oh, that's really creative.
I know. And in between orange and yellow
so
is
artists who like create fun things. The color that they've decided to name in between red and orange is red orange.
Red orange.
Yeah,
really?
You would think that. Okay, I'm wondering if Zach, if
okay,
it was artists that were being creative with the names, if it was just like engineers, they were kind of like, well, it's red orange.
That makes more sense.
Yeah, okay, that's probably better.
Well,
okay.
And I mean, if you wanted to get really creative on some sort of Crayola crayon, it's probably called like tomato or something. So
I like tomatoes. Big tomato fan.
Yeah.
We should have a show on tomatoes.
Or cooking. We could have the podcast cooking show with Zach, where I walk you through my cooking.
Oh my.
Okay, back to color. So there are 12 tertiary colors that fall in between the primaries and the secondaries.
Right.
Okay, but there are colors that are it's kind of like notes on the piano. If they're too close together, they're discordant, but opposites attract and do well together.
Well, yeah. Opposites create a lot of contrast, which the contrast will be in harmony. So, for instance, like blue and orange is my favorite complementary color set because blue is the coldest cold. No matter which direction blue goes in, if it goes towards purple or if it goes towards green, it's still going to be cool. And orange is considered the hottest hot because no matter which direction goes, if it goes towards red or if it goes towards yellow, it's still going to be considered warm. So like a blue and orange make a really big impact, and they typically make the other color look colder or look warmer because they're in a really, really high contrast. But if you were to put blue and blue-green next to each other, there wouldn't really be a whole lot of activity because they are very close in color.
So you work at the flower shop, all right? And there's, from what I understand, there's two kinds of orders that come in.
Yeah.
Some of them come in and they say, I want you to make the XYZ bouquet.
Right.
And you grab those flowers and you stick them in there.
Yep.
And add some baby's breath and some greenery and a vase and put a bow on it and everybody's happy.
Right.
But the other one is somebody says, I would like to spend X amount of dollars and I need it for a wedding, or I need it for a Happy Mother's Day or something like that.
Right.
Make me something beautiful. Right. What's the process for that?
Well, it's really interesting. So, we do have floral recipes that we have some vases that we say, you can get the Happy Day bouquet, and it includes these flowers. When we get to design our own vases, that is really the best because we get to use, whatever flowers we have on hand. So it's really cost effective for us because we don't have to think about substitutions or possibly having to buy a certain flower for a recipe.
Yeah, so the recipe says that you have to use 2 carnations and a rose, but if you don't have something, then there are substitutes in the recipe that you can use. Like you don't have garlic, you can use cloves, or right? I mean, is that the kind of thing?
I mean, if
you don't have garlic, go buy some garlic because you need garlic. That's like cooking 101. Okay, like that, I will die on that hill and then some. So.
I'll give you that, but yeah, for the flower recipes.
Yeah, for the flower recipes, I mean, you can substitute a flower that maybe has a similar texture, or especially a flower that has a similar hue. But yes, we love to make our own designs, and actually, I would say really the most creative part about specifically floral design that I do is really working working within a budget. And figuring out how to stretch that budget to make something really nice for people because depending on the flower, different kinds of flowers cost a different amount.
Okay, there's 2 things you mentioned I want to come back to. So what you said, the first one is you mentioned hue,
Uh-huh.
All right. And it's not Hugh, my buddy Hugh at work. This is Hue, Hue.
Right.
And that's
Well, I know
different
what
than
this one means, I think.
it's different than shade or tint or what.
Yeah, it is.
Tell me what these words mean.
So hue basically just means color. A shade or a tint refers to how dark or light that color is.
So shade and tint, but they're in opposite directions.
Yeah.
There's it's essentially the same thing, but shades are darker.
Correct.
And tints are lighter.
Yeah.
And how do you make a shade or a tint? Would you add or what?
Well, you shades or tints would have to do with how saturated that color is, which is sometimes referred to as color intensity. So, for instance, if we took the color red and just as a pure pigment, red is a very intense, saturated color. And as we add white, red starts to move towards pink, and we get like a really nice, perhaps maybe not so intense, really, really light pink.
So, this may surprise a lot of our listeners, but I don't know a lot about either colors or flowers. But I do know that there are flowers that have multiple different type of variant of colors. So roses, you could have a black rose, a white rose, a red rose, probably an orange rose, probably some color that I don't even know exists type rose. How does you, as the artist creating a floral arrangement, think about, okay, well, I get to choose a rose? Do you just choose the default red rose, or do you add maybe there needs to be a white rose to this? Do you get to experiment with that a little bit?
But some of the roses have meaning, right? Red rose means means eros, right? And black rose means something different.
Sure. I mean, people have all kinds of opinions about roses and what they mean and whatever. But definitely. I do not really gravitate towards the red rose. Truthfully, red is just not a color that I really like that much. But there are just about every color rose. I mean, there's even light green roses, which are really, really fun. Yeah. So
they
look like mint chocolate chip ice cream?
They do, except for without the chocolate chips.
Whoa, dude. Okay, wait. So there's a lot of different. Okay, there's a million things here that I want to think about. Okay, so you talked about taking red and adding white.
Oh yeah.
Is that the same as taking white and adding red, or does that not?
I would say sort of, because I mean, eventually you would get such a light color that there would be more white in it than red.
Okay.
I mean, if you take 3 parts white and you add 1 part red, you're going to get a really nice shade of pink. But if you take 3 parts red and 1 part white, it's not going to be that different than red.
Okay, but that is tinting things, is adding white, right? But shading things, you add black.
Yeah, well, black, but also kind of gray. I mean, you make it darker, so you kind of could add black, but I mean, you add black, and you might go towards like a brick red. And something else that you do as you're going within these tints and shades and thinking about saturation is you eventually just approach gray.
Yeah. So if I'm adding a pigment, like very dark pigment like black, that's absorbing all the light.
Right.
So that diminishes the intensity of the color.
Correct.
But when I add white, I'm reflecting a lot of light, a lot of the rest of the spectrum that's not there, and that kind of washes that color out and makes it less intense, but not.
But it is lighter in value.
But it's lighter in value.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's hue, which is the color, and then there's value.
Value, which refers to how light or dark something is.
Okay, and value is the tint or the shade.
Correct.
Okay, is there another piece of that?
There's another piece of that, which is. So we were going to have to go through this again because I said the wrong thing.
Oh, what'd you say?
So value has to do with how light or dark something is, which is your tints and your shades. Okay. So going from brick red to rose.
Okay.
And then your color intensity or your saturation has to do with how bright the color is, and you desaturate by going towards gray.
Whoa. Okay. We're going to have to listen to this on. So if you're losing track of this, what you do is on the podcast machine, you hit that back arrow. Like 3 or 4 times, because it'll get you back about 90 seconds or a minute and a half, and then you hit the 1/2 speed, and then you can listen to it more slowly, because this is getting really mind-boggling. But you mentioned a thing a while back. You talked about you really like to have the kind of the open-ended, but with a finite budget.
Oh yeah,
and that seems to me like you said a long time ago that creativity without boundaries is just noise, and it seems to me that this idea of the idea of having a budget really gives you some boundaries. I mean, you can't make anything. You have to fit within that. So how does that? What are the trials and tribulations and the parameters that you have to fit in that make that interesting?
Well, I think a lot of it is just having to think creatively about how to stretch your money and what kind of shape you want to give a bouquet. So let's say someone's spending, $100 on a vase.
Is that a lot?
Yeah, I mean, it's more than most people would spend, but over time it becomes less than it sounds like.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's right.
So let's say someone wanted to spend, $100 on a vase. So they want it to be pretty big and showy. And you have to ask yourself, well, how am I going to make this really showy, but at the same time, also make it look really full? Because if someone's spending $100, they probably want quite a few stems in their vase.
It should be big. I mean,
right.
You don't want, okay. Yep.
Right. So you don't just want to use all of the most expensive flour ever. Maybe you want to use some expensive flowers because the money is in there and they want that value. And also flowers have certain styles to them. So, a rose is it can look very romantic. It can also be just a very posh flower. I mean, a pink rose is really sweet. And then at the same time, you could have a flower that's very whimsical looking. So you have to
like a lily,
like Bells of Ireland is like a green line flower that's can be totally wacky if you want it to.
Wow. And then there's like daisies, which are like,
right. Yeah. And daisies might be something that's appropriate for someone that's really young, or, maybe having a white daisy in an all white arrangement makes it look a little more subdued or whatever.
So when you're putting the flowers together, you have an inventory from which you can choose. All right. And so do you go in there and you're like, wow, these are, do they come in season? Like there's certain flowers.
Some of them,
right? Like sunflowers you don't find some. We're now in February.
Right.
You're not allowed sunflowers right now.
We actually, strangely enough, we do have sunflowers now, but it just does not feel right. And and they are not the same as when they come in August.
Wait, so if there are sunflowers in there, but you don't have a gigantic greenhouse where you go out and snip the flowers.
Correct.
They get ordered from a
wholesaler.
Who has the big gigantic greenhouse?
The wholesaler does not have a greenhouse. The wholesaler buys them from a grower, and oftentimes they're grown in greenhouses in California or Florida or South America. So a lot of flowers come from South America.
Okay, so they grow them down there. They snip them.
Yep.
Drop them in some water and ship them up here to Indianapolis. And so that's like, when you get them, how long have they been since they've been cut?
That is a good question. I actually don't know for sure. I do know that because they are a perishable item, they are rushed. So they will travel very quickly from South America, overnight, to wherever they're going to go. Flowers are a perishable item. It's like, it's like having produce or
like bananas.
Like that. Yeah.
You don't put bananas in the flower bouquet. Have you ever been tempted?
If it's an edible arrangement, you might.
That's right. So do you ever put bananas in an arrangement?
We don't put them in the arrangement, but we do make fruit baskets.
No way.
Yeah, we do.
Do you have like one of those wicker cornucopias that you stick them in?
We have wicker cornucopias that we do make flower arrangements in for Thanksgiving.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's exciting. All right. So they get grown in South America.
Yeah.
They get flown all around the world, I would guess. Like you are one flower shop here in Indianapolis, and there are flower shops everywhere.
Yep.
That's got to be a gigantic industry. I mean, the flower shop has got to be billions and billions of dollars.
Yeah, and actually, it's kind of nuts. I don't know how much it costs the growers to grow them, but it is really intriguing to me how much they cost by the time we sell them at a retail price, because the wholesalers buy them from the growers.
Right.
The growers buy the seeds from who knows where, and everyone has to make a profit, and the wholesalers sell it to us at a wholesale price, but it's still marked up because they have to make money.
They got to eat, right?
We sell it at a retail price, and then they wilt on someone's kitchen counter.
Wow. And then they'll sit there for So do you ever build them for durability? So like you build a
Mhm.
flower bouquet that I want this to last a long time.
Right.
So what are flowers that last a long time? So if you want to be really stretch your flower longevity, how do you what do you do?
Well, carnations last a long time. A lot of people don't like carnations because they think that they're cheap, which, I mean, they're not very expensive, but a lot of people just don't really like them. Daisies tend to last a long time as well. And roses, really, I mean, if you take care of roses, they can last a long time.
So you're talking like a couple weeks or a couple days, or like
I mean, maybe like at least a week.
at least a week. Wow. All right.
Well, I mean, out in room temperature.
Yeah. But you know, and when you get the flowers, they come with that little pack of magic flower food, right?
Yeah.
Right? And if you put those on magic beans, you can grow a beanstalk.
Yes, very
Absolutely.
sort of like
Okay.
that. Yeah.
Okay. If your name is Jack. Okay. And so you put that stuff. What do you know what that stuff is? Is it just sugars, or is it?
I think a lot of it just is sugar. I do know that some people don't even use formulated flour food. Some people will even put Sprite in there in the water because it's very sugary.
Now, when I was a kid, we used to put
sugar. Dad's like, ooh, look, cookies.
We used to put food coloring in our water.
All
right, because that was fun because it was kind of like science, and it would go up and make the little things in the petals different colors and stuff like that. And that sometimes Mom would get mad.
Right.
So do you ever do that?
No.
Okay.
She just gets the already changed colors flowers.
Wow. Okay, well, there's a million things that we could talk about more about flowers. Deck, we're about out of time, aren't we?
Oh, we got about 5 minutes before they kick us out of the studio here. So,
all right. So what is the thing that surprised you the most about the flower being
art thing?
The flower art thing. Now you work with a guy that's taught you a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So what has surprised you or enlightened you about the job there at Flowerland?
I think what surprises me the most, and I probably should have seen this coming, but I am really surprised by just like the whole beauty of the flowers and the fact that people order flowers for very big occasions in their life. And flowers are something that's really important at really big events. If you have a wedding or a funeral or an anniversary or a baby shower, I mean, it's hardly ever just an insignificant day. And I am just really touched that I am a part of that. And it's very humbling because I'm honestly just a schmuck that always shows up 3 minutes late and wears the same sneakers every day. And, basically works in this like warehouse type thing where we have a huge cooler and I make a mess. And what I'm really amazed by is the act of the flowers as a gift and as something that you give away and as something that you make. And then, I mean, my favorite thing ever is when somebody orders something and then you make it for them and they come and pick it up and they just think it's so beautiful. And you just make things and make things and make things. And every day they just go out the door and you get to give them away.
But you get to work with one of the good things, right? With the truth, goodness, and beauty. And you get to do beauty there in a real grand sense. I mean, you look at how flowers, flowering plants changed the planet with their introduction evolutionarily. And you look at the diversity of how flowers show up. It's an incredible gift to this planet is the flowers, just from what they do to get bees and bugs to reproduce them, and the beauty that they give to us. It's got to be a wonderful feeling to be able to work in that environment.
Yeah, and I think especially there is something really significant about the fact that the flowers are perishable and that this is something that people invest in for the sake of they want to make something beautiful.
Even if it's short-lived.
Yeah, and I just think that is something really special. And there are so few things in our culture that people do just for their own sake. And people order flowers just because they love them, because they're beautiful and they smell good and they're pretty and they have them for all of these really significant things, because when something is really important, we want to make it beautiful. And I just love that. And I love that I get to give them away and make people happy and that people love them.
Wow. All right. I could see that. Zach?
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. Thank you for coming on, Olivia. If you would like to, one last comment and one last question from us is if you can give our listeners one little piece of advice on how to go seek the good and enjoy the adventure of life, what would that be?
Stop and smell the roses.
Stop and smell the roses.
Saw that one coming. All right, give us a better one.
Well, I think a lot of art has to do with learning how to see, and which has to do with learning how to see the world around us and appreciating that beauty and really deepening a sense of wonder. I think all kinds of artists, no matter whether or not they're poets or they're painters or they're floral designers or whatever they are, they're making something out of a general wonder about the world and a general thought about it. And I think that is a particular quality that gets lost a lot in our really fast moving, really immediate culture. And people can lose sight of just how beautiful everything is around us. So I highly encourage people to just wonder at the world, take a moment and appreciate those things, because it is definitely a quality that is lost and that I think is greatly enriching to people's lives and themselves.
So get some flowers and give them to somebody.
Yeah.
And that'll make them happy and it'll spread a little beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And when you hand off the flowers, look inside them, and because there's a lot of wonder going on inside those little flowers, and think about what they're doing, and think about the people that make it beautiful for you. Zach?
Yeah, that all sounds great. I'm pretty sure we all learned more about flowers today than I ever thought I could learn. We learned more about art than I have ever learned. So that was all great. Olivia, thanks for coming on. Rafe, it's always a pleasure for you to join me. So thank you all for listening. Go seek the good, be the good, and spread the good. Go enjoy the adventure of life.